St. Petersburg, Florida. I just spent the last 2 days of my life in this city. I spent 9 hours with rideshare passengers in this city, racking up a total of $120. That's less than Florida's minimum wage, and that doesn't include all the tolls you have to pay to drive through this city. The good thing is I got footage of St. Petersburg, Florida for today's video, and I got to meet over a dozen people from this city. So not only are we going to go over analytics, but we're also going to get a real life perspective on what's going on in one of Florida's 5 largest cities. Right now, there's a whopping 2,700 houses in the inventory for St. Petersburg, Florida. In this market, you can buy a gutted 2-bedroom, 1-bath that recently flooded for over $200,000. For $470,000, you can get a 3-bedroom, 3-bath house that is also a complete gut job since it also flooded. For $150,000, you can get a 7,000 square foot lot with a house that probably needs to get demolished. Now, the Travel and Leisure website describes this as reasonable home prices, encouraging people that they should move to the Tampa Bay area as one of the greatest places to live. To be fair, there are great things about the Tampa area. As we came off the Skyway Bridge, on the right you can see large schools of fish. I saw tarpon jumping. I even saw the fin of what could have been a whale or perhaps a tiger shark going after some tarpon. And yes, this really is the natural color of these waters. There's definitely a lot of great things to love about the Tampa Bay area. But today we're really going to break down exactly what's going on with this real estate market. A real estate market that is definitely overvalued. And don't get me wrong, there's beautiful beaches, there's warm weather, but then there's also hurricanes and a lot of other problems in the state of Florida. So it's not this fairy tale that realtors want you to believe to live here. Over on the West Coast, you got Scottsdale, Arizona, and Boise, Idaho, 2 very popular cities. You can see that there's a correlation between home prices there. When it comes to these trends, they're really national. So you can't just say the state of Florida's real estate market because this is a national trend. The only difference is that in some places, it's going to plateau and stay at these prices. And in other places, it's starting to curve and drop. A lot of cities out west, the prices are plateauing. They reached a point where they're not going to get any higher, but they're going to maintain there. But here in the state of Florida, something different's happening. In St. Petersburg, for example, prices have already started to drop, and we don't know for how long they're going to continue to drop. A lot of people are still preaching the red state, blue state garbage. Look, Scottsdale, Arizona, and Chula Vista, California, they're both on the West Coast, and their prices are pretty much correlating exactly. Chula Vista is a suburb of San Diego, and Scottsdale is a suburb of Phoenix. One's a red state, one's a blue state, and the prices are doing the same exact thing. This is not a local or state economy issue for the most part. While there are regional variations, for the most part, these are national trends right now. For example, a lot of Midwestern cities like Pittsburgh have had a nice and steady growth. Yes, they're considerably more affordable than Tampa and St. Pete, but they're steadily growing. Long and steady, even if it's slow growth, is a lot healthier than the roller coasters of Florida and Las Vegas. Now, you may have recently heard that, for example, Cape Coral, Florida right now has the most foreclosures and has the worst real estate market of anywhere in the United States. But the reality is that Cape Coral and St. Petersburg actually have roughly about the same population, and the real estate markets correlate almost perfectly. For me, it's a little intriguing that home prices in St. Petersburg and Clearwater are identical and that they correlate, because there's a few very stark differences between these cities that should really make you wonder, why do these real estate markets correlate? I mean, for one, Cape Coral is mostly newer construction, and St. Petersburg is mostly older houses. St. Petersburg is a young, kind of millennial hipster city, and Cape Coral is kind of where people from New Jersey retire. St. Petersburg has a large, massive downtown with skyscrapers, and Cape Coral just has a never-ending grid pattern of streets with canals. So to me, it's perplexing that these real estate markets have the same exact prices, and on top of that, that they correlate so much as time moves on. Even the composition of the real estate here is different. For the most part, in Cape Coral, you have newer construction and older condos. Here in St. Petersburg, you got these really expensive apartments like you see here on the left. These are labeled as luxury apartments with a lot of amenities. These places are extraordinarily expensive. Even a small one-bedroom can set you back as much as $2,400 a month in St. Petersburg. These types of apartments are usually rented out by well-to-do students. For example, this is Eckerd University. It's like a marine university in the southern tip of St. Petersburg, and I did end up twice here. So out of my 15 or 16 passengers, 2 of them came out of this university. So this is a really busy area on Uber. These are kids that are studying to work for jobs in the Coast Guard or as marine biologists or any other type of marine type job. This is where they get their education. A lot of kids from New York and Connecticut are out here. So let's be clear that St. Petersburg attracts young professionals and Cape Coral attracts kind of older retired people. So to me, I did find it perplexing that these two real estate markets would correlate, and with roughly the same population, it's interesting that the analytics match themselves almost perfectly between these two cities. You hear a lot of negative information about Cape Coral right now, but not too many people are talking about St. Petersburg, and that is definitely intriguing to me. Now, I'm in St. Petersburg and in Cape Coral on a monthly basis. I'm really familiar with both of these cities. From my perspective, things in St. Petersburg were a lot better off. So to me, it's kind of shocking to see that these real estate markets are kind of in the same boat right now for a few reasons. I'm mostly familiar with the rental market. Now, I moved recently and I looked at apartments in Cape Coral and in St. Petersburg. Now, you can get an apartment in downtown Cape Coral, a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, maybe for $1,900 or $2,000 a month. That same apartment in St. Petersburg is going to cost you $300 to $400 more. And with all the students and education and being a larger metropolitan area, there's definitely more demand for rental property in St. Petersburg than there is in Cape Coral. There's no doubt about that. But frankly, to summarize this particular topic, I just really felt that deep down St. Petersburg was in a lot better condition than Cape Coral or any of these other cities in Southwest Florida, because St. Petersburg is an older core. It's already built up. It's got great infrastructure. It's part of a larger metropolitan area. It's got great beaches. And I just assumed that all the new home construction and development, which is what landed Cape Coral and Lehigh and other places in Florida in that predicament, doesn't exist in St. Petersburg. So how can St. Petersburg be stuck in the same boat? But somehow, if you look at numbers, there's a lot in common. Maybe not at first glance. So in today's video, we're just going to try to understand exactly what's going on in St. Petersburg and why this real estate market that superficially should be doing better. And one of the other aspects about St. Petersburg that should make it different is the demographics. Now, Pinellas County is the only white majority urban core in the state of Florida. Most of Florida's large urban cores are going to be more diverse than that, and whites usually have better analytics on income, and they're going to be more economically secure than other mixed races. So you would assume, with this being the largest concentration of urban white population in Florida, that here things would be doing better than in other parts where issues like immigration have definitely put a dent on the local economies. Yet, there is a lot of work that needs to get done in St. Petersburg, Florida to rebuild after the hurricanes. And even here, who do you think is doing that work? It is part of the Tampa metropolitan area, and a lot of the people that did most of the cleanup here were in fact Hispanics. In other words, there is a large white population here, but they simply are not involved in the types of jobs that you need in the aftermath of a hurricane. Now, if you saw the destruction that existed here 1 year ago along the coast of Tampa and St. Petersburg, you would understand that what has been done here in the cleanup efforts of removing all the debris has been exceptional. So that's progress. You don't see piles of garbage everywhere. The garbage has been hauled away. The problem is that the insurance companies have been really dragging their feet to give people checks to rebuild. And that means that many of the businesses, homes, and anything really that was insured here is not just going to go back to functioning immediately. And in the state of Florida, from what I've read, insurance companies are overwhelmingly winning court cases. So people aren't getting the payouts that they are entitled to for paying their insurance on properties and other assets. As we head north on St. Petersburg Beach, it looks like a ghost town. And as you guys know, the tourist season in Florida has already started. It's been 16 days. October is the start of the tourist season, and they haven't shown up, and they probably won't. And if they did show up, there's very few hotels that are back and running, at least, the little affordable places. The number of restaurants that have closed is concerning. The number of hotels and resorts that are still not back and running, some of them probably won't ever go back to functioning, by the way. The situation along St. Petersburg's coast is concerning because the money has not returned, the customers have not returned, and it looks like a lot of people are holding out for a 3 to 4 year recovery, which means that for the next few years, even if there were tourists here, there aren't accommodations for them. Now, keep in mind that this area hadn't got hit by a hurricane in like 100 years. They get hit by one hurricane, and then 2 weeks later, they get hit by another. Now, these back-to-back hurricanes kind of imprinted into the mind of the locals that perhaps hurricanes now are a more ever-present figure. I mean, literally, when you have two hurricanes in the same 2 week period, it definitely makes people rethink rebuilding, because after all, it's going to happen again. We've all heard horrible things about Oakland, California, but what's interesting is that the St. Petersburg real estate market is doing roughly the same thing that Oakland's real estate market is doing as far as trends go, but Oakland, California is 2 times more expensive. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but money doesn't just grow on trees in California. People have to work for it, and they pay a lot of taxes on that money, so there's a reason why it's worth more than St. Petersburg. Perhaps you don't know the reason, but there's a reason why Oakland, California is more expensive. Over the last few years, people's perception of different states and real estate markets has been really delusional. Overall, St. Petersburg and Oakland, California, 2 very different cities on paper, right? And from the perception of people, have done practically the same thing as far as trends go. You would never know that if you're watching Fox News, and then you compare it to a city like Cape Coral, and it's doing the same exact thing. So again, these are national trends. The only difference is that, like I said, some cities are plateauing, and some cities, like St. Petersburg, are diving down when it comes to real estate prices. And there's no telling how far down that dive will be. It could be monumental. What I find concerning among my Uber passengers today is that people are still interested in buying in this market. Anybody would know that with these interest rates, with these general trends that the real estate market is going in as a whole, and particularly in these type of coastal cities in Florida, that now is not a time to buy. But you wouldn't believe how many people are actually looking to buy real estate right now in Florida, even though the market is literally heading in a bad direction. In a few years, perhaps interest rates could be better and prices could be better, and these people that bought now are dearly going to regret that. But it doesn't seem like people right now are just that informed of what's going on. It's like all the analytics are already there. You can already see this whole thing happening, but a lot of people are still kind of lost. They're still dreaming of buying a house. They think now that prices came down a little, or that there's a little bit of turmoil in the real estate market, that this is their opportunity to buy. But in reality, these things take a lot of time. Unless something unprecedented happens, the real estate market's not like the stock market where things can just go up or down crazy overnight. Besides, the writing is already on the wall. If businesses are closed, Season's around the corner. Insurance companies still haven't paid out. Resorts aren't rebuilding. This is 3 to 4 years. I mean, there's no real logical way to expect things to happen overnight here in Florida. If you look at the situation here, the amount of businesses that are closed, the amount of hotels that are not functioning, the amount of houses that are still kind of in construction, this is not going to happen this year. So Florida is in cycles. Real estate works in cycles. Florida's economy works in cycles. It isn't going to happen during this season. It's not possible. I mean, if you really sit back and wonder, okay, the insurance companies, the restaurants, for tourism to return, all of these restaurants have to be popping off. All of these resorts have to be open again. So if it's not happening this year, we're talking 3 to 4 years. So the most logical conclusion is, if it ain't going to happen this year, then it's a long haul situation. This isn't going to fix itself overnight. Backtrack 3 years, Hurricane Ian hits Naples and Fort Myers. There's YouTubers who've deleted their videos that like to insult revenue. Some bald-headed dude from Texas, he made a video saying that real estate prices were going to crash in Fort Myers because of Hurricane Ian. I made a reply video saying the complete opposite's going to happen. Now that the rich people don't have houses, because they got destroyed by the hurricane, they're actually going to be demanding more real estate further inland, and they're going to need to rebuild those houses. They're going to snowbird either way, so it's going to drive up prices. That was my theory. And if you're from Naples and Fort Myers, that's exactly what happened. Hurricane Ian caused real estate prices to explode in Naples and Fort Myers because there was a demand for the real estate, but there wasn't a supply. Now, I know my audience mutually watches these other YouTube channels that also make videos about Florida real estate, but boy, these guys have been wrong so many times about things that are so important that their credibility to me is non-existent. You may not say that my channel gets the most viewer, that I'm the most likable YouTuber on this topic, but when I make videos on these topics, I don't make those type of mistakes. Like I said, Hurricane Ian, less supply, more demand. Real estate prices shot up in Naples and Fort Myers. When other people were making the conclusion that prices were going to drop because of the hurricane, I was the first one to clarify that like 2 weeks after the hurricane, saying, no, you're going to see prices increase. And that's exactly what happened. Why didn't the same thing happen in Tampa, Bradenton, St. Petersburg? Because here, prices really did go down after the hurricane. You would think with all this real estate here being destroyed that there would be more demand for real estate further inland. And there was a little bit. Right after the hurricanes hit Bradenton and Sarasota, my apartment complex in Lakewood Ranch got filled up with people from Anna Maria Island who lost their homes, but it was a temporary thing. So the differences are that here you have tourism, you have international tourism, where in Naples and Fort Myers you have wealthy or affluent snowbirds. There's plenty of seasonality in Clearwater and St. Petersburg. These are cities that in the wintertime are packed and in the summertime are mostly empty. Clearwater and Sarasota are probably some of the most seasonal cities in the state, followed by Naples and Port Charlotte, Punta Gorda area. These are places where it's like an accordion. It's either bursting at the seams or completely dead. That's the cycle of life in Florida. But the Tampa St. Petersburg metropolitan area is kind of a younger demographic in a lot of ways. It's also a much larger metropolitan area, so you have also packed beaches during the summer. The locals want to enjoy the beaches. They fill up beaches, they fill up restaurants, but they don't fill up hotels. The state of Florida's war on spring breakers was definitely not a good look for this metropolitan area, because spring break is actually a huge part of the economy here as well. And the state of Florida, for some reason, wanted to destroy that as well. These culture wars that the United States and that the state of Florida have fought have been destructive. Tampa International Airport is actually an international airport. Anna Maria Island, Siesta Key, Clearwater Beach, St. Petersburg Beach, Treasure Island, Fort DeSoto. These are international travel destinations, and Tampa's airport is massive and it's international. These culture wars have taken a massive toll on the local economy. So it isn't just the hurricanes, it's also the social aspect of politics, which has led to a lot of people just not wanting to visit Florida. So it's a little bit more dynamic than just what happens after a hurricane, because that can vary from city to city. For example, if Miami gets hit for a hurricane, there's no telling what could happen. It's not happened in a while. We saw what happened with Hurricane Andrew. We saw stricter building codes. We saw better construction, which led to higher real estate prices. And today, Miami is one of the most expensive real estate markets in the United States. Hadn't Hurricane Andrew hit Miami, Miami could be something like Jacksonville. Who knows? Or Houston, where you don't really have all that many building codes and not much zoning regulation. At the end of the day, being able to predict what the aftermath of a hurricane is going to be in a city like Tampa that hasn't got hit by a hurricane in over 100 years is a difficult challenge. But the local economy doesn't always reflect real estate prices. You would think that if a city is expensive, that real estate prices would increase, and that happens in a lot of places. Oakland, California, probably a prime example of a place that's extraordinarily expensive because there's a great job market in the metropolitan area. A lot of people, particularly those moving to Florida from the Midwest, just assume that there's a correlation between cost of living and real estate prices with incomes and wages in Florida, and that isn't the case. There are literally places where rents cost half as much as Florida and houses cost half as much as Florida, where you can easily make twice as much income. The cost of living, incomes versus housing in Florida, is disproportionate in a very negative way. On one end, that correlation simply doesn't exist in Florida, and a lot of people just assume that they're going to move to Florida, and yeah, things are more expensive, but we're going to make more money. Then discover, no, it's more expensive, but you're actually going to make less money. State officials in Florida have done a horrible job at misleading people to believe that this state has a great economy and that this state has great wages. So many people move to Florida with the presumption that their incomes are going to correlate with the cost of living here, and it simply isn't true. It's never been like that. The state of Florida has Alabama and Mississippi incomes, but it also has California cost of living. And then even after all the taxes that you're going to pay in those cities and states, your disposable income will still be greater than Florida. Again, just a lot of misconceptions, and sadly, officials in Florida continue to spread misinformation to attract people to this state where they eventually find out that things don't add up. Right now in the Midwest and in the old Rust Belt area, states like Ohio, Indiana, places like that, you're starting to see prices continue to slowly increase. Cities like Louisville, Kentucky, it's like a very healthy growth. But there's been nothing healthy about the growth in Florida. The growth in Florida has been based around basically in misinformation. There's no other way to put it. Take Fort Wayne, Indiana. 250,000 people, roughly the same population as St. Petersburg. It has less than half the inventory. Sure, real estate prices here are not as high, but it's a much healthier real estate market that's slowly growing, and that's a very healthy way to do things. While houses here sit less time on the market, people many times get more than what they're asking for. A completely flipped scenario to what's happening now in Florida, where the inventory is massive. Houses sit on the market for a very long time. Look at this house near downtown St. Petersburg. They just dropped it $40,000. That's a significant price reduction, and I think even then it's still overpriced. And that's really the problem with Florida, is that this hasn't hit bottom yet. It's not going to for a while because people are still unrealistic. Even at this new price, it's still completely unrealistic that somebody's going to pay over $500,000 for a small house near downtown in neighborhoods that are practically homeless camps. So at this point, year over year, St. Petersburg housing market has dropped about 10%. And while we know that physically in the city, there's reasons why prices have to drop and why hurricane damage would be a huge factor in that situation. But then you look at national trends and you have to scratch your head and wonder why it correlates with cities that didn't have hurricanes. Eventually, people do have to figure out that these prices need to deflate. and that the reality needs to set in of what's really happening here in St. Petersburg, Florida. I mean, if the people that already own properties here, they're trying to get rid of them. They're aware of what's happening, but they're also trying to get some prices that are completely unrealistic to what they're actually going to get. I mean, who's really going to sign up to buy one of these houses in Florida that's old, outdated, uninsurable, likely going to flood again in another hurricane? Like, who's really genuinely going to sign up for that much uncertainty right now? Nobody's going to sign up for that. If people are going to buy these type of properties, they're going to buy them for the land value so that they can hold on to it, to rezone it, and buy multiple plots of land to build something bigger that is up to current codes. So again, we're talking about a process that's going to take years. Of course, not every piece of real estate in St. Petersburg is on the water. It's a city that's surrounded by water. A lot of its real estate is vulnerable, but not all of it. And it's a big city with great beaches. People are always going to want to live here. It's always going to be a trending and fun place for people to want to live. It's a very safe city, and that makes it better than probably 90% of the cities in the United States. But a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that's a complete gut job at over $400,000, this isn't something that the youth in this city can afford. The police officers, the teachers, the people that have good jobs in St. Petersburg with local governments, they got to go live all the way over there in Manatee County in Palmetto or Parrish. On the other side of that Skyway Bridge is Palmetto, Florida. This place ain't much, but this is where professionals and people with good jobs in St. Petersburg have to live. And it really shouldn't be that way. Those people should be able to live in the city. And a lot of people in St. Pete got kids that are still living with them that eventually want to get their own places. It's a city that has a lot of people, that are from there that have to live in Spring Hill or Brooksville or way the crap somewhere in Plant City or Lakeland or Manatee County because they can't afford to live in their city. Whether renting or buying, the prices in St. Petersburg for the local incomes and wages is so unrealistic. The people that are from this city have to move somewhere else to be able to afford to be within the vicinity of St. Petersburg. Perhaps if these resorts are not able to bring customers back, perhaps if a lot of those people that were renting out vacation homes put these homes back on the market for regular people, then perhaps some of these people that are moving to other places like Parrish or Palmetto could reconsider moving to St. Petersburg. The problem is that they're not going to take on the liability of buying a house that could have 4 feet of water in it because they're already strapped for cash. And they're not going to buy a house that's not insurable. They're going to have to finance a house, which means that their only options are like in the outskirts of Palmetto, all these new subdivisions. So it's a very dysfunctional system and very impractical. I mean, in theory, people should be able to live close to where they work, but there's so many geographical barriers with this area that it isn't really possible. And in the state of Florida, with all these natural disasters, the liability that comes along with it, it's creating a very messed up urban landscape. An urban landscape that has a lot of void in the middle, a lot of places that exist but are no longer utilitarian. There's no use for them. So it raises the question, what should these houses be worth? The real problem here is that these houses are more a liability than an asset, and they can only be an asset if there's a lot of demand for vacation rentals or rich people who want them, and right now nobody wants that liability, so these properties are sitting ducks that are useless. And property taxes in these coastal cities are not a joke. The overhead on these properties is significant, whether it's insurance, whether it's property taxes, and it isn't a practical acquisition for the regular working class person. So even though now these houses are kind of if in the ballpark of what somebody could afford, it still isn't practical for somebody to take on that much liability when there's options further out into the outskirts of the cities and suburbs that don't have that much liability. So the only real hope that these properties have is to be swallowed up by developers, or for these districts to just become entire ghost towns until developers can go in, buy everything, and rezone it into larger resorts, and turning this coastline into something like a Miami or a Broward County, where everything along the coastline is extraordinarily expensive, built up very strong. this is the reality of St. Petersburg's real estate market. Very complex and definitely not good. And my dog is vomiting a turd that it ate earlier, so I'm going to let you guys go.